sort of basically films on Venice. Now, if you're not that interested in Venice, it's a long watch. And really almost touching on that, what if you're doing stunning looking videos? And his videos are particularly lovely and brilliant. So, you know, if my film actually genuinely looked like that photograph, then you might think, oh, yeah, I'd like to watch that. So that's a kind of art house thing, you know. If your films look great, then people might like watching them. But there's a huge emphasis on you doing fantastic films, of course. The other option, which has happened to me a few times, and I actually watched a whole series of things from South Australia, actually got reached out by a club in South Australia. And I found it really interesting. But I was watching basically films of people who were showing bits of South Australia. I had to judge them. So, of course, I watched them. I was kind of interested in South Australia. So I suppose that fits the second category slightly. But as films, if I was just literally coming cold, there would be no real reason to watch it, right from the title itself. So what's the story? Well, everything, I think, can have a story. And this really just, I suppose, boils back down to what the world is all about. And I do a lot of digital content, digital learning. And one of the things that hits you incredibly strongly, which I think is not news to everyone, not news to anyone, is that is basically you need to grab people's attention in a world where we don't have a great deal of time and people don't linger long. And so your titles right from the start obviously have to be pretty powerful and pretty interesting. So let's imagine you're trying to attract a bunch of people to look at your film, and they're none of those four characters. So here I just had a little bit of fun. Just came up with four titles yesterday or the day before, and these would be titles that might make you want to do it. So you could have The Paris They Keep Secret. Well, there we are, intriguing. You've gone and wandered around Paris, but you've got some things that you may never have come across. So that gets your curiosity going. You're waiting to find out what is this and why do they keep it secret? How about one of the classic sort of controversy type angles? This is not the real Eiffel Tower. Right, okay, well, we're gonna hold that fact back a little bit. So I'll watch this film for a while because I'm intrigued. Well, what do you mean it's not the real Eiffel Tower? Well, that could be all sorts of reasons. Maybe it could be this isn't the one they wanted to create or something like that. Then the other thing you could do is you know, a little bit that might just get people intrigued. You know, why do Parisians hate everyone else? Well, having been to Paris and having spoken to a few French in the past, that is a view that some people have. But this would be okay. Well, I'll try and examine this, so I could still have all my shots of Paris and everything else. But in effect, you know, I could just put a little slant on it. And then I just thought a really weird one, we should definitely get lots of people watching, is Why I Died in Paris. Well, that could be a story, could be a tale, could be anything. It could be I was doing you know, a comedy show. So I died on stage, like I could be dying now. So those might get people to look at it. And then, of course, you've got a story, you've got a tag. And so to me, it's all about, well, really, it's down to why you want to make a film. And in Bristol, and that's a picture from a kind of biggish production that the guys did years before I joined, a film called Cabot, which is about the sailor who actually was based in Bristol, who came over to the basically kind of discovered America or was involved in that. But for everyone in that club, it's mainly for enjoyment. A lot of the filming is done, they enter competitions. It's a bit of a sideline, but fundamentally it's just the joy of just getting together and making something. And sometimes that does result in, well, I think everyone would be honest and say productions that could be a bit sharper, productions that could have maybe something a little tighter, a little more interesting. But of course, in the end, it's never going to be shown to the public. It's never been, it's just for fun. So in the end, you don't have those principles shoved at you. There are one or two people in the club who who have kind of aspirations to some extent, but some people just have a kind of sense of let's aim higher. But it's interesting that people have actually kicked back a little bit against Bristol winning awards here and there for a while, because Bristol kept on doing it and being, you know, there was a certain amount of concern that some people who had been an audio recorder in the past were being allowed to enter competitions, you know, you're kind of professional. So it's mainly for enjoyment. But I sometimes use this analogy when I'm talking to people about doing learning programs a lot, is let's imagine you're on imagine your program is a London bus, an old-fashioned London bus, one you could jump on and off on. You can't actually do that anymore. So what if your viewers, you know, you want them to enjoy themselves and stay on the bus? In other words, watch the whole film. Well, the thing you need to do, obviously, is you need to get them on that bus in the first place. And because it's so easy to jump off that bus, and YouTube and everything else, it's incredibly easy to exit. You guys are all assembled, so you're gonna listen me out. But if this was done in a classic Zoom that we do in the club, it's incredibly easy for someone to just mute, go off, have a cup of coffee. It's just so easy now to get off the bus. So in a way, I think, even though you might as well do it for fun, you might as well see what can I do to make this topic interesting enough that people will stay on the bus. And those of you know about marketing may have come across this, called AIDA: awareness, interest, desire, action. Basically, it's the way in which we buy products. So we get aware of the product. Okay, you're kind of interested, but you need to get to the D, the desire moment, which says, I've got to buy this, regardless of what I'm doing. And so how do you create the D? Well, that's what, in a way, the rest of this talk is about, is that essentially you want someone to say, I want to know what happens next. It's the classic page turner. It's that sort of idea. So the way you can do that is you pose a dilemma. So how is this person going to get out of this situation? That's the classic inciting moment in a drama. Or it could be a question, is this the real Eiffel Tower? It just gets in your mind. I want to find out. I'm going to wait until the end. And the key thing is making them curious, and curiosity killing the cat is absolutely a core, to me, to everything. And I try and do it in my learning programs now. I try and come up with something up front, rather than just saying, by the end of this program, you'll have learned X, Y, and Z. I'll try and pose a dilemma or curiosity, or tell a story that they want to know how it's going to unfold. So finally, on this first section, I want to touch on something which obviously is very close to your home, Searching for Sugar Man. One of my favorite documentaries, absolutely adored it. I knew nothing about the story, and anyone who, I recommend anyone, if you haven't seen it, watch it, but I don't recommend you ask anyone what it's about, because it's twists in the plot and everything. But the reason is because the starting scene is this guy who basically explains that he's called Sugar because his name is quite close to this album cover of this guy from America, but was immensely popular in South Africa. And the opening scene has him driving along this road, and he drives down this curve of this road. And this is the exact moment I remember when it hooked me, because basically he says, I want to know what happened to this guy, because he was huge. And I heard that he killed himself on stage. He set himself alight on stage. This is what we were told. And then he says, I want to find out why he did that. And that is how the whole documentary starts. And then it goes off in a most extraordinary direction. And those of you who've seen it, I hope, have enjoyed it and love it. And if you haven't, watch it. It's brilliant. And it's obviously a very interesting, it brings in a lot about the history of South Africa as well, and earlier times under apartheid. So to me, it's always find the hook. So I'm going to finish by looking at the rule of 6. And This is this guy, Walter Murch. He's there he is editing Apocalypse Now. He's clutching his Oscars. So he kind of knows his stuff. And what he did was he started to write some books afterwards, as you do. And he came up with the rule of 6. And the rule of 6 was, whenever you're telling a story or cutting or editing, there are some things that you need to think about. And when you cut, you're doing it in order to do certain things. So you have a 3-dimensional space of action. So in other words, you might well cut to another clip to show where someone is in the scene, what's happening. So classically, you'd have an opening wide shot. Where is this place taking place? You might have a close-up of someone doing something on the potter's wheel, and then you close up on the face. All of these things are basically saying, who are they, where are they, what are they doing? And it's a classic way in which you introduce a scene. The next bit is you should always play to the rule that you don't cross the line, and we'll touch on that in a minute, but it's a rule that I'm sure all of you come across, the 180-degree rule, where you get the camera, and if you do cross the line, you do it for a reason. Eye trace is the really interesting thing that I didn't come across, I hadn't knew before, but you make it easy for the viewer to see what's going on. Again, that makes things work. And then there's the rhythm. The rhythm might affect how, if it's intense and it's fast, then you'll cut quicker, that sort of idea. We'll look at all of these in a minute. But as you can see, then we get into things like, is it telling a story? And is it creating emotion? And these were his 6 things. And in the perfect cut, all 6 are satisfied. So what I did was, I actually took well-known sequences in films, and I literally screen grabbed at the moment that the cut was made. So what you're actually seeing is the moment exactly where the cut was made, and we can look at why those cuts were made along the way to basically illustrate each of these things. So the first one is the good, the bad, and the ugly. So this is the opening bit, and clearly already it's showing quite an interesting 3-dimensional space of the action. Clint Eastwood is at the back. Basically, it's a gunfight. Now what you see is one of the characters starts to move across. It's a very strange scene, but it does it in order to change the space, right? So Clint has moved miles away. It's a ridiculous fight in many respects, but it's extraordinary in its scenery. And then you cut to a wide shot, and just to say, look, this is where we're at. And you can see they're all in those same positions. The wide shot continues to there, so you now see they're in their place. Now we take another line. This is an awful lot of shots just to show this depth of field. And now we're seeing it from each individual, from Clint's view, from his view, from his view. And so essentially all of these things are basically saying, are you there? You got it? You see where we're at? Now, Walter Murch, when he did these things, wanted to emphasize how important these were. So these figures are his percentages. So they don't really mean anything, but it just shows how he feels. So basically what he thinks is the importance of the edit, of the story, of telling that story. He only put it down at about 4%. So he's saying it's a useful exercise, but it's not crucial. So what you then need to do is think about the 2-dimensional space of things. So basically, of course, we're on screen, which makes it tricky. We're not in a 3 dimensions when we're watching a film. So you have to have a sense of orientation. So you have the stage line, which is also known as the 180-degree rule. So this is a perfect example from a great film called Heat. And it's got De Niro and Pacino, and they're talking to each other, and it's a real standoff moment. It's a great scene. But what you can see here is, because of the way it's filmed, we are always one side of the line. It just goes backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. It's a kind of well-known thing in drama generally. But sometimes you might want to break it. So sometimes you break the rule, but you break the rule for a reason. And here is a classic scene in The Shining. Now, those of you who've seen The Shining will kind of know the story that Jack Nicholson is a caretaker in the US. And he goes to this empty, lonely, haunted hotel during winter. And this character is not real. He is a ghost. And so for that reason, Kubrick is trying to disorientate you. So he shoots one bit from one side and shoots from the other side. He's doing it to disorientate because we're not used to this idea of two angles. So he's basically saying there's something strange going on here, and he's doing it by the way in which he shoots it. So you can deliberately disorientate if you want. So the butler's not real. Again, how important is it? 5%. So not quite as important as all the others. But again, it settles you down. Now, this is the really interesting one, which I think almost no one in our club, when I presented this, had come across it. So I think this is pretty new for a lot of people. But this is all about basically saying, if you actually have the focal point of the new shot where the viewer expects it to be, in other words, where they've just been looking previously, the whole thing feels really smooth and it's not too disorientating. And it can keep the intensity of the scene going. Now, this is a scene from Cool Hand Luke. And what you'll actually see here is that Paul Newman is on a chain gang. And I think he's about to be introduced to the chain gang. And they're all saying, who the hell is this? And obviously you start by seeing him. So that eye is where we're all naturally looking. So I kept the eye here. These are all clips these are all the cut moments from this whole scene. Every single moment is a cut. There's nothing I've missed. So the next cut is to the guy looking at Paul Newman. And guess what? He's in the same place. Now you see his chains being broken off. Same place. Paul Newman, same place. Baddie, same place. Now that is deliberate. He could be anywhere on that screen, but he's deliberately in the same place. So you keep the intensity going and it's just natural. Paul Newman again, Baddie again. Even at that distance, him being hit by the guy is in the same place. Now we have the baddie again. We're still interested in his reaction to that. So he's still there. So what you've seen there is that if you keep it in the same place, it's smooth, it works. If you actually want the viewer to look at different bits of the screen all the way across, then you are deliberately making it chaotic and confusing. So again, if the focal point is moving around, that might be a deliberate ploy you do to say it's busy, it's chaotic. So for example, if you're doing a crowd scene, you may well have a lot of noise here, someone over here, someone over here, someone over here, and it gets people moving around. What's the percentage? Again, well, it's not crucial. So all of these things aren't crucial in Walter Murch's mind to actually make the film successful. So now films have rhythm. Often it's music or it's dialogue or what's actually happening. And so actually, he looked at music and he basically said, if you had different musical rhythms, this is what your cutting would be. So if it was grave, which is a very slow paced, and andante, that kind of allegro, you can see they get faster and faster, the cutting. So if you're actually presto and you're doing a really fast paced soundtrack and things are happening, then you would probably cut every second. A good illustration is going back to my scene. Now, that wide setting scene is grave, and the music has got that brilliant Morricone kind of soundtrack, slowly moving around. But as time goes on, as you're building up the tension, the music has gone to andante. So now the cuts are getting a bit faster. And then when you're upping the tension, these cuts are happening pretty quickly. We got close-ups, boom, boom, boom. And then right at the final scene, whoa, you go straight in and they're going from eye to eye to eye to eye to eye before bang. Not him gets shot, but he gets shot. So, and that's the final chord, is Clint shooting the guy. So rhythm is important. You still think it's important. But now we've got two left, for those of you remembering, story and emotion. And these are the things that are really the epitome of what makes things. Does it advance the story? When you do the edit, does it help tell the story? If it doesn't, why are we doing it? Schindler's List, this brilliant scene, when he first sees what the impact of the Germans clearing out the Jews in the early days of the Third Reich. Now, he's on a horse up top of a hill, and he begins to see that something's going on. He's our main hero. He's the up till now he hasn't really had any real sense of what terrible things are going on. He's been shielded from it all. So what he sees is this famous scene with the girl in the red dress. Astonishing bit of cutting and editing and coloring. Everything's in black and white the whole film, but she is in red, and she's wandering the street. So that's his view. So that's a natural piece of storytelling. When someone looks somewhere, you normally see what the person's looking at. He's obviously reacting, intrigued, makes us intrigued. Close up further, she's still wandering around. He's wondering what's going on, and this brutality is going on all around her. Closing up, going closer up to him. And then we cut to her. Now, this is obviously not what he's seeing, but we're telling the story of her. And she's wandering around, almost being ignored by everyone. As you can see, cleverly, she's walking in the opposite direction from everyone else being herded. And no one's doing anything about her at all. And surprise, surprise, we're getting more and more close-ups. So the editing is saying, no, I want to get closer on his reaction to this. She's still wandering around. He's still watching. She now his wife, you're beginning to see her reaction now, and she's upset. Now, these, as I said, these are literally the edit points all the way along. So this is the moment where you go, bang, you hit her. Back to him. Very interesting shot there, because there's a lot of white space behind there. So he hasn't tightened up. So it's an intriguing shot that Spielberg's done there. There's the girl again. Now it's a real close-up. Clearly, he's not seeing it like that. So we're now hearing the story. Now we're now seeing the story from her point of view, because he isn't going to see the rest. He's not going to see this. And this is her hiding away. Now, he is now looking at this scene. He can't see her, but we know that he clearly can't see her now, because she's here. And this is a really sad scene where she hides away. Now, notice she's in red. She's now in black. So a clever bit of editing then, just to say, look, I got your attention. She's now like everyone else, struggling. And then he goes away. So obviously there's no 180-degree rule in this case. It's broken all of those kind of rules, but he's telling the story. Now, he thinks this is really important. Nah, 23%. That's much more like it. The final piece in the jigsaw, and I was telling you it's all about story. Well, story and curiosity works extremely well, in my opinion, when you're making documentaries or factual films. And that's what I learned on my course. But obviously, drama is more than that. Drama is about emotion. If you've got no emotion, you've got no investment in the characters in a drama, then you've got nothing. And so Walter Murch ultimately tries to create emotion in his films, and that is the most important thing in his opinion. So the final piece of the jigsaw is that. So is it true to the emotion we want viewers to feel here? Does it push you along the intended emotional line? So this is a film you maybe not come across, but it's a really interesting one because it's trying to create emotion. I got a couple I've got here. First of all, it's about chaos. It's about losing something. It's about people leaving their settlement in Scandinavia, and you can see the priest is stuck there. There's a cyclist, so that's one cut. This is extraordinary here. That it's very disorientating. It's not beautifully lined up. Each of these is deliberately a cut to make you feel raw, and it's that sense of desolation. And there's cut to her, cut to the priest goes walking down the road, so they see this priest leaving. But you can see they're all very chaotic, but it's slightly charming in a way. This is completely different. This is a very famous scene from The Godfather, where when everyone talks about juxtaposition and irony, this is the one they always do. This is basically the gang leader played by Pacino. It's his kid. Basically coming into the church, and it starts with this scene, but it's juxtaposed at identical side when all these people are being killed off at the same time by his gang. So you have all of these people all being killed off, and there's him saying all these pious things as it's happening. It's a very famous scene. You can see it on YouTube, and you can see how it interplays. And Murch's view is that's a huge importance. So he wants to create emotion in what he's doing. I think that's so much easier when you're talking about a drama, as I said earlier, rather than a documentary. But combine the two, bang, you have this. This is, in my opinion, the most effective scene in movie history, because it creates that emotion, and classically you've got a kid in the middle of it, and it's a pivotal moment in the whole film, which is probably one of the most powerful films that have been ever made. So that's the rule of 6. And the idea about that rule of 6 to me is, in a perfect cut, a perfect edit, a perfect film will have all of those in place. In many ways, it's a checklist, you know? So how often do our edits satisfy those rules? Well, they may or may not. Sometimes when it works really, really well, you go, that's interesting, that works. And I looked at a couple of the films that Mike suggested, having some of the guys that you did. And it's really interesting to see that iTrace actually is instinctively working in one or two places of the ones that are really nicely put together. So it happens. If they didn't, did they work? Basically, it makes you think. So my final, basically, slide is really just to say, think very carefully when you make your film. You can have a lot of fun. You can do whatever you want to do. But when you're editing it, when you're putting it together, when you're preparing it, have a think about that. It's going to be 10, 15, 20 minutes of someone's life. Make it worthwhile. And you can do that by making it intriguing. Obviously, if you promise a lot at the beginning as a storyteller and you don't deliver, well, that's a shame. But even the curiosity and the disappointment of something happening or not happening, we're going to find the secret Paris. No, there isn't any secret Paris. Well, in the end, it still got someone intrigued. So that's it. I'll do my best to answer any questions when you have any, or if you have any. Now this might be fun. I might have to have a spokesperson for all the questions.
We've just asked them for questions, but there doesn't seem to be any.
Very interesting, thank you.
Yeah, Mark, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
You've just messed up my video making, because I have no idea how I'm going to incorporate all of those things.
Well, I think the most important thing for me is, and I think about it all the time, is why did I include that? You know what I mean? When it's often the edit. I don't think it matters about your filming. If I've got that animal walking across that place, or I got this, or I got that, and I'm just putting something together, is it there just because I filmed it? And I think that's the thing I think filmmakers often have to face. I took an awful effort making that shot. I climbed up half that hill. I'm going to include this in my film, yes, regardless, because yes, I made that effort. And that's why I think that's why filmmakers don't edit their own films on the whole, because the editor goes in and goes, I don't know what that is, and they get rid of it. And I think that's then if you're a really good filmmaker, you're editing in your head, you go, okay, I got those stuff. It was fun doing that, but actually, I don't think I want to throw that in front of anybody, because that's not telling a story. That's not kind of interesting. So I think you have to enjoy the craft of telling the story after you've had the enjoyment of making the film. And they're two things I think you have to sort of get into and enjoy doing. Or find someone you can work with who loves the idea of telling the story, and then it's a very powerful combination.
I find that if I've done my sort of edit to the stage that it's sort of nearly ready, I leave it for a week or two and then look at it again. And I said, now, why did I do that? Or that's
Yeah.
take that out. So that helps a bit. But in effect, if I film the clip that looks beautiful, I leave it in, boy, whether you like it or not.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. It's when I was doing at the beginning of that presentation, I was trying to think through, don't know who are the people who tend to watch the films we make, yeah, and they tend to be people who we've locked into a room like you are at the moment, and we turn the thing on and then we play. Then in the old days, in the very old days, it used to be all the shots from our holiday, and then people would be invited round, and an hour and a half later, you've got the final picture of an elephant, you know, that you've shown from the safari you went on. You think, I think I've seen enough pictures of elephants by now. And I think in a weird sort of way, I think amateur filmmaking, I suspect, suffers the same problem. I was we had a local judging thing in our own area, and it had some videos from other groups and things, and it was really interesting because it got the backup of a few of the people in the club, because actually one or two of the winners had interesting subjects, but they weren't great films. So in the end, someone was interested in this historical figure who was featured in the film, but actually it wasn't a very good film. And I think it's a bit hit and miss. You know, ultimately in the end, get a great topic, get something interesting, and it probably doesn't matter how you film it, people will want to watch it. But if you have a topic that isn't that interesting, you better be a really good filmmaker, like of course you are, Mike.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. You haven't seen any of my videos.
It's very good. It's lovely. It's great you meeting in person. I'm very impressed. We still haven't got to that point here in Britain.
We will. I've got kids in England. Hang on, we have a question for you.
How long did it take him before he automatically pulled all these different schemes from different angles, wide angles, etc.?
Okay, put you on the spot. Penny wants to know, how long did it take you making videos before you could use the rule of 6 effectively?
Well, first of all, I had to know the rule of 6, and I only learned that because I was on an academic course. Surprise, surprise. I think what happened was, in the end, as soon as I was aware of it, I couldn't not think about it. You know, so every shot I got, I would mirror it. So, for example, where I'm looking at you now, Mike, and you're just to the left of the screen, yeah. So if you look at me, I would then edit myself to here because I know where it's at. So I would move the camera to it, or I'd have mirroring, you know, people having the same face size and shape, or I would deliberately go here to create that sense of moving backwards and forwards. So to some extent, I think as soon as I heard it and saw it, when I was in the edit, I would look for clips that would naturally do it. So I think the eye trace thing is, once it's with you, you've got no choice. You just instinctively feel it.
Well, that was the one that I thought about most, apart from the storytelling and the emotions, the eye trace. I have never been conscious of that, and you're going to wreck my videos from now on because I have to change positions every 2 minutes to try and keep the eye trace in position. But it's a fantastic one there.
Yeah, but the beauty is, if you can film in 4K, for example, you just move it. You know, the beauty in the past, if you got it wrong, you were stuffed.
Yeah.
But now just do a wider shot, and then you can choose where the hell you move anyone.
Yes. Was it Billy another? Yes, sir. They would like to know, when you're putting a storyboard together or when you're starting to put it out, do you plan the emotion up front, or does it just sort of come out as you go?
Well, I mean, there's two things. Are you talking about drama, or are we talking? I mean, I don't think you storyboard a factual thing. You tend to gather what material you've got, and then you try and piece it together. So I'm assuming you mean a drama then. You know, it's interesting to me is I hate the chaos of the film set. And I hate the pressure of not quite knowing what shot you're going to do. I think some people wander in and go, right, I'm going to film that. And oh, yeah, that angle. I'll draw everything. So I storyboard everything for that emotion. And interestingly, we've just been given the opportunity to go into a lovely old house, which is part ruined in Bristol. And we got a month that we can go into it in August. And I've written a ghost story to go with it, which is all about emotion. It's all about tension. It's all about fear. And I have to think really carefully about those shots, because in my head, I've written a Hollywood movie, you know? Yeah. In my head, I've got the best ghost story that's ever been created in the history of mankind. Even though I've never, ever made one in my whole life, I know it's going to be brilliant in my head. My problem is, as soon as we get in there and we have all my mates with the cameras wielding around, they go, can we do that shot around the corner? Yeah, that's all right. Then, you know, and I'm going to get this horrible thing that I'm going to edit together, and it's not going to feel right. And what's fascinating is that one of the guys in the club, Graham, who's the founder of it all, really, or the son of the founder of it all. It's a long-standing club. Graham made a very pertinent comment. He says, you can't just have shots inside of the house and think it's going to look spooky, you know. And he's right. There's a danger that you think, oh, we'll just have a scene here and we'll have a creak of a floorboard. No, that will do it. So you actually have to think about what are the shots that are going to do that. So yes, I would storyboard. Personally, I storyboard every shot, because I want to know before I even do it, it's going to work. Because I know in the end, if we're going to film it, we won't be able to film some of those shots. There's going to be enough moments when we're going to have to improvise anyway. You know, an actor's not quite getting it right, or the scene just isn't panning out. But I've got all the shots kind of worked out in my head. Interestingly, I haven't storyboarded them at all yet. And yet, because they're in my head, I'm assuming all the people I've been talking to about this plot have already got it. It's really weird. I'm going, yeah, well, of course they're going to be in the scene. When we pan out, we're going to go, what do you mean pan? Where, what scene? And I'm going, well, no, in the scene. And I'm realizing I haven't drawn it, which is a challenge. Can't draw, of course.
We're in the unfortunate probably position where we've changed from those days. I think you're extremely lucky to have a club that can get a bunch of guys together, and people like you write a plot, a story, and then go and film it. Unfortunately, we tend to go out there and wave a camera around individually these days. So we've got to do it all ourselves. And not being good script writers, we don't always come up with a story that we would even put as a storyboard before we went in there. So we've got a bit of thinking to do. You've just
well,
up
yeah,
the year.
Yeah, my challenge is that there's always something, you know, that if you're going to a local nature reserve or something like that, it's the story is, I've always wanted to film this animal. Will this be the time I can do it? You know, and then you can lead, then you can play that story along. Then you can say, not yet, 10 o'clock, not yet, 2 o'clock, not yet. And then always at the end, at 5 o'clock, just before you're about to leave, there it is. You know, and it's okay. Sometimes it's a bit contrived, but that's what I learned on my documentary course, is that unless there's a degree of jeopardy, will they, won't they, even a factual program won't work. There's a brilliant program that I watch a lot because I like it in the UK, and it's called Fake or Fortune. And it's a BBC program, but it's a brilliant idea. It starts with someone coming along and saying, I've got this painting. I think it's a Van Gogh, but all the experts say it isn't. And the whole program is about, is it a Van Gogh or not? That's it. And in the end, you want it to be a Van Gogh every time, because you got to know and like the person who's got the Van Gogh. And in the end, the art historian expert is the nasty person who's going, no, it's not, because it's not in my book. And I don't care that it's got his name and everything. I'm still not putting it in my catalogue. And so you have the goodies, you have the baddies, will they, won't they? And it's a factual program. So I kind of think you just got to keep on thinking, is there a story here? If there isn't, it doesn't matter. You filmed the thing and it's great. But don't expect, going back to my bus analogy, don't expect anyone to reasonably want to watch it for 25 minutes.
Yeah, okay. Just tell us very briefly, the story you told me about the backstory, because I'm always saying, if you want to film something, why don't you think of some part of it and rather draw that out and make a story of that rather than just telling it from A to Z. And you told me that story about the bridge making and the guy somewhere along the line was from Australia and
Yes,
found,
no,
you found another story within the story.
Yeah, no, let me tell you, yeah, it was an exercise I actually did when I did a thing on documentary making, because they basically wanted to get all I knew from my course, and so I presented one full evening at the club, and at the break I decided that I wanted to get them thinking. You know, I'm a management trainer by background, you see, so instinctively I don't particularly just like presenting. I like people doing a bit of work and learning and things like that. So basically what I said was, here's a story, and it's a true story. Basically, near here in Bristol, during the First World War, a rich guy who grew up in Australia, made his money in Australia and went back to Britain, decided to convert his whole house to a hospital. Astonishingly, with operating theatres, everything, a private hospital. And he devoted it purely and simply to those casualties in the First World War in the trenches who were Australian. So it was him paying back his time in Australia. So it was like a private Australian hospital. And it was a really interesting story because, of course, he employed nurses and doctors, and the Australians kind of recouped there, etc. Now, the reason why I mentioned this, and the reason I was saying to Mike, was I said there's so many angles to this story because the house is no longer there. There's some woodland that inside the woodland, people started discovering some of the bits that were part of the house grounds, but they'd been lost for years. So they were clearing the woodland and they were beginning to find all these things that were where the patients used to walk around and recuperate. And they went on trips and things like that. And so there are a number of angles here. You could go along and just tell this story. You could tell the story of the guy going to Australia, setting up the place, etc. And that's where I first heard the story told by a historian. And then I discovered that there was a little story also sitting there. And I just dropped this. I put a big notice board and I said, right, these are all the elements of the story. How are you going to start this? And of course, some people would say, well, I'll start at the beginning. And I said, no, you don't start at the beginning. You've got to start with an intriguing moment. And basically what happened was, immediately after the First World War, a special plaque was presented to this guy to thank them for, it was raised by all of the Australian patients. And it was basically a plaque that was paid for and given to this guy. And it was basically a thank you from everyone, etc. What happened was, over the years when the house got demolished, that plaque went back to Australia. And the people who were behind the conservation of the gardens and everything wanted to get it back, but they couldn't get it back. So in fact, the real story, of course, is how did they get the plaque back? It is now sitting in the middle of the woods at the entrance to the woods, commemorating this extraordinary generous act by this guy in Bristol. And it's there forever in the right place from Australia. So you'd start the documentary by the people reenacting, trying to get it back and not. And then you're going, well, why is this important? And now you're interested. Now you're curious. Now you tell the story with all the emotion. And then you're waiting. Do they get it back? Do they get it back? Now, as a documentary storyteller, which those of you seen Searching for Sugar Man will know that it was made after the events, but it was made to feel as if it's happening during the events, which is really clever. That's what a clever documentary maker does, is that you hold back that final moment. And then the final moment is you see the plaque. Now, no one filmed the plaque being put there. There are only some stills. So as a documentary maker, you'd have to think, do I reenact that? Do I do something about it? But you have to end the film with the plaque is here. There's the emotional end of the story. So I think that's the one I was telling you, Mike, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Any more last questions? All right, Mark, it's for me to say thank you so much for a very
Pleasure.
interesting talk. Thank you for messing up my my productivity and filmmaking for the next 10 years.
The least I could do.
And I have no doubt that we'll have further contact. Thank you very, very much.
That's lovely. Good luck, everyone.
Okay.
Nice to talk to you.
Right,